The future of the college football playoff. Nebraska's fate may rest with one decision. Today, we tell you why.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right. Hello, everybody. It is Thursday here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. All right. So the college football playoff, and we'll talk about this as it pertains to obviously Nebraska as well, but let's lay it out first. The decision makers are trying to make decisions, and we're talking about, to be clear, for the next contract of the college football playoff, which starts in the 2020 after the 2026 season. So not this playoff, the next playoff is what we're dealing with
For the 2026 season, right?
Correct.
Yes.
In the playoff that is after the 2026 season. Yes, right. That's good clarification. Yes. Because I've heard people talking about this and they're like, "Oh, this is we're talking about this year." No, we're not talking about this year. Although they have reseeded, they've done the reseed thing this year.
You're not going to get a bye because you won your conference
necessarily.
You're going to get a bye if you were a top 4 seed based on the evaluation the committee makes of you. So, right. Yeah, that's a lesser issue than what's going on between the powers that be in the SEC and the Big Ten as they jostle to try to get their different plans adopted.
Yeah, it's a wide open slate right now, and there seems to be two ideas that are sort of at the forefront here. And interestingly enough, the SEC and the Big Ten are now kind of going head to head on this. The SEC has talked themselves into, or I suppose I should say, out of the idea that everybody seemed to support earlier, which was kind of the wacky one. We may have mentioned this on this podcast a couple of times, but the idea that each of the Big Ten and the SEC get 4 teams automatically in every single year. It's commonly referred to as the 4-4-2-2-1-1-1. It's really
super catchy. It's super.
It's really good. They didn't come up with a cool name for it or anything. 4-4-2-2-1-1-1.
Which is my phone number when I was a kid.
Right, exactly. It's easy to remember, I suppose. And so the Big Ten is really the only conference, the only power conference specifically that is behind this at the moment. And we know the Big Ten doesn't really like talking. And by the Big Ten, I mean Tony Petitti. They don't like talking. They don't like talking about themselves. Meanwhile, the SEC has turned over
to talk
to a different thing. They have talked themselves into it. Like I said, they love to talk. And they have now thrown their support behind, and Greg Sankey is who we're talking about here, behind the idea that we have the 5 conference champions, and then the rest of the teams, the rest of the 11 in a 16-team playoff, will just be at larges. So as the rankings would suggest. And there we stand at a kind of stalemate right now. And there's a lot on the line.
Yeah. So I'm doing the math in my head here. So both of these formats will lead ultimately to a 16-team playoff. After this year, after this 2025 season, the next playoff that happens, which would be in December and January, December of 2026, January of 2027, right, to be clear, will be a 16-team playoff. And the model that you mentioned first, the one that the Big Ten still seems to support, although we don't hear this from the Big Ten, is 4 teams from the Big Ten, 4 from the SEC, that's 8. And then you get 2 from the Big 12, 2 from the ACC, that brings you to 12. And then 1 G5, 13, and then 3 at large. So it's really the 4-4-2-2-1-3 is the way that I think is most accurate to describe it. 16 teams, 8 from those major conferences, that's half. 4 more from the Big 12 and the ACC, that gets you to 12, 13 from a G5, and then 3 at large. So one of those 3 at large is open to be Notre Dame. And then you could have 2 other at larges back from presumably power conferences. So why at this juncture are the SEC and the Big Ten, who ultimately have the same goal, they share the same goal to take over college football together, why are they at odds about what the proper format is for the playoff a year from now?
Well, I'd like to believe in the SEC and just that they sort of came to their senses on this. And it's stupid. That would be the 4-4-2-2-1-3 method, where the Big Ten and the SEC are automatically getting 4 teams into the playoff every single year, no matter what, is dumb. And it's inequitable, and it's not at all what we want our playoff to be. In my opinion. And so maybe the SEC just came to their senses and said, well, I mean, I think but really what we're talking about is they think they have the opportunity to get more. And that's what they want. They're coming for it all.
Right, because nobody comes to their senses and says, we ought to do what's best for the system. The only decisions they make are, we need to do what is best for us. So the SEC believes that 5 conference champs, which is going to be 1 SEC team, plus 11 at larges, are going to put more than 4 teams from the SEC into the college football playoff. In the other model,
some years they'll be right, and some years it'll work out the other way.
In the other format, they have the opportunity to get more than 4 teams because they've got their automatic 4, and then there's 3 at large, which if Notre Dame's in it, it's 2 at large, but those teams could be from the SEC. So I'm a little bit puzzled as to why the SEC wants to take away from it's just at the beginning of the season, there's going to be at least 4 SEC teams in, which I agree with you is a stupid way to set up the college football playoff. But that's what the decision makers from the most powerful entities in the sport had come up with, that they wanted to do. I'm having a hard time buying that the SEC just decided that this wasn't the right thing to do. It wasn't best for the sport.
Right.
There's got to be something in it for them. And I'm just theorizing here that they're looking for a bargaining chip with the Big Ten. Like the Big Ten is the only other organization out there that has like equal weight to the SEC. And there are some things that that the SEC wants that the Big Ten doesn't necessarily want. Like the SEC wants to continue to play 8 conference games. The SEC either is or is not, I'm not sure which one, in favor of a scheduling alliance with the Big Ten. It seems like it goes back and forth each time there's an interview. One SEC coach or AD talks, and you think they love that idea, and then another one talks and says, why would I do that? The South Carolina, why would we do that? We already play Clemson every year. I'm not going to play a Big Ten team on top of that. So it's hard to know as a conference what they really stand for. I'm not sure that they stand for anything. But to me, part of the reason that the SEC is pushing a model that's different from what the Big Ten is pushing is because they're just looking for some way to be able to get leverage and have bargaining power against the Big Ten. So there's some other issue out there that they're looking like for compromise. And maybe that's a schedule alliance. Maybe that's the number of conference games that you play. Maybe it's something else that we're not even thinking about, revenue dividing. I don't know. But like I'm not buying that it's that they just came to their senses and thought, we'll take less if that's the way it should be because we want to be fair to everyone else in college football. The SEC got past that point a long time ago.
I think you're right. Ultimately, I do think what you said. This whole thing revolves around the 8 conference games versus the 9 conference games. A decade ago, When Jim Delaney was the commissioner of the Big Ten, he added that 9th conference game, and it helped out their TV partners to get them more inventory to sell and got them a bigger payout. But ultimately, it did not serve the Big Ten well because they have an extra difficult game. And so the SEC has figured out that they can have everything they want. They can have their cake and eat it too. They can play their 8 conference games and still get as big of a payout as the Big Ten does when they get more teams into the college football playoff. And why do they get more teams into the college football playoff? Because they all have better records than the Big Ten teams because they play one less conference game. And so I do think that's the big bargaining chip here, that the SEC, they are just not letting go of this. As much as it did seem like we were tracking that way at one point in time, that everybody was going to get on the same page. The Big Ten and the SEC were going to come together. But I don't know if that's great for the sport either, for the record. But they were going to come together, play 9 games, have a scheduling alliance, and then they were going to do the automatic 4 into the playoff every single year. And the SEC said, actually, I don't know. I kind of did the math on this thing, and I feel like we can have our cake and eat it too. So I think we can still play our 8 conference games, look really good on paper, and therefore get more teams in the college football playoff without a quote unquote cap. It's not a cap like you explained in the 4-4 method. But at some point there is, right? The SEC is saying, all right, we're going to get automatically our conference champion in, and then 6 out of the 11 could also be ours. I think that's probably what they're thinking. Don't cap us.
Yeah. The big question here, as it relates to us in this podcast, we'll talk about after the break. And that is, which one of these systems and what among the other bargaining pieces is best for Matt Rule in the Nebraska Cornhuskers? That's coming up after this. Right now, I want to tell you that there's nothing like the energy of a live sporting event, and Game Time makes that energy easy to capture. Whether it's a last-minute Major League Baseball showdown, or maybe you want to soak up the excitement of one of these final NBA games of the season, you can find great tickets at a great price, or at least the best price available when it comes to the NBA Finals, with Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever because prices drop as the events get closer. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front, no surprise fees at checkout. I love using Game Time because it has helped me get into Major League Baseball stadiums without any stress. I'm going to be back in Kansas City 2 weeks from Friday. Royals-Dodgers. Hopefully the Royals have won another game by that point. They are struggling as we speak against the New York Yankees, but I have confidence that I'm going to see a good team on June 27th face the defending world champion Los Angeles Dodgers. And part of the fun that I'm going to have is playing around with Game Time and checking out the zone deals, looking at the views from my seat before I get into the stadium, and having the peace of mind to know that there's no surprise fees and that the lowest price guarantee is in effect. You can book just as I do with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. The last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, back with you. Segment number 2 of this Locked On Nebraska podcast, Thursday episode, June 12th. We are on the eve of the College World Series beginning in Omaha. We are excited. Are we excited about that? Are you ready to get downtown and get to work?
Yeah, I'm ready to get my sweat on. I'm ready to lose some water weight over the next couple of weeks. Just in time for the College World Series every year, it gets blistering hot like the 2 days before it starts. And that process began on Wednesday.
It was 95 on Wednesday. Didn't feel that hot. I'm telling you, I was outside in the heat of the day, and maybe this is just because I came from the Caribbean where it was 95 with 95% humidity. Today it was like 25% humidity in Omaha, or 30%. It was like the desert.
Don't worry,
And
we'll get there.
yeah, it didn't feel too bad. I'm sure we will get there, and it will end with a massive thunderstorm that threatens every living soul in the city. All the visitors will be scared out of their mind as lightning crashes around the hotels and things like that. So, looking forward to that. Looking forward also to some things that are going on in Nebraska. They got more camps going on. Friday Night Lights event this week at Memorial Stadium, and Huskers have got some OTA stuff. I don't know that we're really going to get reports. This is a new thing in college football, where you have coaches on the field in June with players and footballs being thrown around. They're doing it, and I think it's just going to kind of go under the radar. It's within the rules. There's no these are not secret practices that are happening or anything like that. But so far they've kind of kept the media at arm's length from this, and I think that's still going to be the plan next week. So let's continue our discussion about the college football playoff and what's to come in the future. We've mentioned there are two prevalent models. You have the 5 conference champs plus the 11 at-large selections that the SEC seems to back, and then you have the 4 apiece from the Big Ten and the SEC that are locked in various other selections that go toward making a final 16 starting in the 2026 season. So what is best for Nebraska? Seems to me that the model with 4 guaranteed spots from the Big Ten is a no-brainer. Is that just too simple? Like, is that clearly the best fit for Nebraska? Is there anything about that fit that doesn't work better for Nebraska than the 5+11 method?
I suppose if I was making a case for the other one, for Nebraska, for the one that has more at-large spots, the way that Nebraska seems to want to schedule going forward, specifically in the non-con, which is just easier. I mean, you're going to, you've already lost a future non-conference high major, Power 5 opponent in Tennessee. Wouldn't surprise me if you lost more in the future. So those games are kind of going by the wayside. So, I mean, maybe you could make an argument that Nebraska might not be top 4 in the Big Ten, but they're a 9 or 10 win team and they're in the top 15 in the country.
Okay.
That you could make that argument. I still think the automatic 4 is probably your best route for a team like Nebraska, because then, you can sneak in there and maybe a year where, you're one game or you own a tiebreaker over, some other teams, and maybe there's I don't know, in this world, is there a play-in or something like that? So I do think you're right. But it's possible that the other way could work too.
You don't have to have like a generational kind of team. You don't have for Nebraska in the place that Nebraska occupies in today's college football. You don't have to have a team that is generational is probably too strong of a phrase, but like the best team of your best team of the decade necessarily to be in contention for the playoff in the first week of December. If you finish in the top 6 in your league, which is doable for Nebraska, I would say like 40% of the time that should be the expectation. For Nebraska to finish in the top 6 of an 18-team Big Ten, sure, they can do that every 2 out of every 5 years. Why not? Some people might scoff at that, but no, I think that's realistic to at least to expect that. If you finish in the top 6 on championship weekend in this system, you're going to be playing for a spot in the playoff, because basically the way that it will work is 1 and 2 are in, and then 3 plays 6 and 4 plays 5 for the final 2 automatic spots from your league. So if you finish in the top 6, you aren't in the 16-team playoff yet, but you're basically in a play-in game to get in the playoff, and that would be pretty exciting.
Yeah. So if you look at it back from last year, it would have been, Oregon went undefeated in the league. Penn State did not play Indiana, right? They just both were 8-1. in the league. Ohio State went 7-2. Illinois was 6-3, and Iowa was 6-3. Those are your top six. So you basically have, you have Penn State and Iowa meeting up, and Ohio State and Illinois meeting up, and that's kind of what the story would be.
You would have some interesting tiebreaker situations. You mentioned Penn State and Indiana.
Not everybody plays each other because the conference is gigantic, way too big.
That's a potential hurdle that has to be cleared. Penn State and Indiana last year tied for second, correct, in the Big Ten, and did not play each other. So how do you determine the automatic entry, and the other one has to play in a game against the sixth place finisher? That
probably
that would get
be my guess, like college football playoff poll ranking.
Yeah, that would get hairy. That would get you could find some other tiebreakers, but be ready for that in 2026 if we go to this system to create a lot of controversy. And to be honest with you, that's an argument for the 5+11 right there, because you don't want to have to deal with that junk. You don't want to have a situation where you turn on ESPN on a Saturday or a Friday in the first week of December or the end of November, and people are screaming at each other about who's better, 8-1 Penn State in the Big Ten or 8-1 Indiana, and there's no way to know because they didn't play. And by the way,
like that was my whole thing with when we changed up this coming year's playoff, and it, you just by winning the conference, you don't get an automatic bye this time, and you just go to the reseed and it's based on the ranking. Like, I want the conference champion to get an advantage. I think that I think you should be rewarded for winning your conference. And then, although you could make a case that it's not all that rewarding because you don't get an on-campus, home college football playoff game. So
they all lost. They all lost in the next game, in the next round. The teams with the buys just couldn't. And that was
like that every year.
No. You also end up with Boise State hosting a first round game, and it led to some quirky stuff. And I think it clearly raised a lot of red flags around the sport because just some odd things happened, and there was agreement that they didn't think that was the long-term answer. But however it goes in year two, it's not, it's all going to change in year three. So that's just where we're at. There was this suggestion that Lane Kiffin had of forget any automatic entries and just take the 16 best teams.
That could get really dangerous in a hurry. Like, so think about this. If you're doing the four automatic method, you were in the top six. Iowa went 6-3 in the league last year. They finished sixth place in the conference, and they went 8-5 in the regular. They went 8-4 in the regular season. Like, is that doable for Nebraska today? Yeah, that doable for Nebraska in 2025. Absolutely, it is. So yeah, you're not as far away as you think. But at the same time, Nebraska still has to kind of prove that they could be there.
I mean, how about when there's a tie between sixth and seventh? And you have to break it in some arbitrary kind of way. That to me, it factors into the consideration that has to be given to the
divisions,
right? The 4-4, the 4-4 method. I still think that's the best for Nebraska, and we can touch briefly on like what it means for the non-conference if the entirety of the playoff field is being determined, or the vast majority of the playoff field is being determined by automatic conference entries. Then is there more incentive to then go play a big time non-conference game in September? Like, could Nebraska then put a Colorado or an Oklahoma back on the calendar and know that it wasn't a big deal? It wouldn't even really matter because all you have to do is go and finish in the top 6 in your league.
At that point, you're thinking about television and television only, right? At that point, the SEC would add their 9th game, and then the Big Ten and the SEC would come up with a scheduling alliance, and they would go one by one all the way down, the line basically, and they would play each other. That's what would happen in the non-con, which once again, as you just mentioned, wouldn't matter at all, which is ridiculous. It's completely stupid.
It would only matter for the final 3 at-large spots. The non-con would matter a lot more if you have 11 at-large spots. So I like that system better. I think the 4+4 is better for Nebraska. So do with that what you will. And sometime in the next 6 months, the college football power structure is going to sit down and come to an agreement on this. At least that seems to be the case. Maybe it'll be like the House settlement, and it'll just continue to drag on weeks and months past the expected deadline date. So, speaking of the House settlement, we're going to talk a little bit about some things tied to that are impacting college football this month in the wake of the decision a week ago by Judge Claudia Wilken. There's an appeal. We're going to talk about that next.
All right, welcome back. Segment 3, Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you here on a Thursday. Last call, get your mailbag questions in. We will do that show, of course, tomorrow.
Mega mailbag.
Yeah, big mailbag, like a rapid fire mailbag. So we're excited to do that, get back on the horse there. What is the College Sports Commission? Okay, this is going to be the thing that that governs this kind of new era, basically, of college football, and they have appointed a CEO, Brian Seeley, who's a former MLB executive, and he was in charge of salary cap enforcement, or at least that's a part of his deal, which is interesting because now we go into a world in college athletics where each athletic department this year, for example, it'll be $20.5 million that you could distribute to your athletes however you see fit. Of course, we've talked about this before plenty. Schools like Nebraska, power conference schools, they will distribute most of it to their football team and then figure out what's important to them after that. But part of this settlement came little more stringent rules, or at least that's the idea, on name, image, and likeness, where it has to pass through the clearinghouse. Brian, the CEO, Mr. Seeley, he will seemingly,
we're on a first name basis.
Yeah, Brian, Mr. Seeley. He will govern this. He will overwatch this on the clearinghouse thing. So I have a lot of questions with this, but the number one thing I guess is, so you're putting, if we could just go back and kind of get a clearer picture of what this is, you're trying to put in rules right now that would make it so you level off the playing field at least a little bit, right? $20.5 million you can distribute to your student athletes, and there's not going to be any more pay for play with NIL, because that's what basically it's turned into. They're going to have to be real life NIL deals, and they have to pass through this clearinghouse. That's the idea with this. The question that I keep coming up with, Mitch, is like, do the schools who have the built-in advantage because they have so much money and so many resources at their fingertips, say the Ohio States of the world or whatever, do they want this? I mean, do they want to give up their edge willingly for the quote unquote greater good of the game? You know, it would be nice if we were playing on a little bit more of a level playing field, but I can't imagine that there's a world where, you know, some of the real bigwigs around the country would want to just kind of willingly give that up.
No, I don't know why Ohio State or Texas would want to sign away their ability to pay athletes above and beyond and have a huge advantage through
they're
NIL.
planning on having like a $50 million football roster. And nothing can stop them.
And they might be pressured by their leagues to go away from that and to sign on with the rules that are being enforced by this new CSC. So I saw a funny line from my coworker Stuart Mandel at The Athletic, and he said that Seeley has been hired and given likely a 7-figure salary to ensure that athletes in college sports don't get paid 7 figures anymore.
Amazing. That is a good line.
So let me just say this. What if you are Arch Manning? What if you are just pick Jeremiah Smith, Heisman Trophy candidate, receiver from Ohio State. He's done the work. He has proven himself to be a tremendous player, future first-round NFL draft pick for certain. And he sells tickets. He sells merchandise. He gets Ohio State to a place where it's a favorite to make the college football playoff in any year that he's on the team. And some company in Columbus, Ohio, or Cleveland, Ohio, wants to pay him $5 million because they say he's worth that to Ohio State. And the receipts say that he's worth it because when he plays, the TV numbers are through the roof and the ticket sales are through the roof and the merchandise goes crazy. His jerseys can't stay in the store. How can the clearinghouse determine that he's not worth what the company X, Y, or Z wants to pay him? I do not understand that. I don't know that I will be able to understand that no matter what someone says to me in trying to explain how the NIL Go clearinghouse works.
Is it possible that the clearinghouse will be lenient on something exactly like that? Like the situation that you just explained is like, yeah, I mean, that's a fair market value. He's, that's an appropriate price. It's not pay for play. He's already there. Right. So
he endorses your product and your sales go nuts.
So is there a world where the clearinghouse clears that, and just says, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so then that clears the path for more stuff like that. Like, I guess I don't know what that ultimately looks like. And maybe we have to find out more about this Brian Seeley guy to find that out.
Yeah. We have to wait until it goes into effect. What's funny about this CSC is like the NCAA failed miserably at enforcing less complex issues than the NIL clearinghouse and salary cap enforcement as it relates to revenue sharing. So why are we to think that this new organization, the CSC, will do it any better?
Yeah. The other question is like who. So obviously it's this organization that is making the guidelines and enforcing the guidelines, but what happens if you break them? Like
they can suspend you. They can render you ineligible if you were determined to have received an illegal, an improper NIL arrangement. If a school violates revenue sharing rules, salary cap rules, they can potentially lose money. Yeah.
I just think all this sounds a lot better than it actually functionally is going to work from the NCAA or from the CSC's perspective. Like it just feels like it's going to be difficult.
And then if you have this in place with football, with FBS football, what does the NCAA do? What's the point? Why do they exist?
Anyway. Their playoff, the playoff is separate from the NCAA.
It is, but they still like govern the sport. They still work on like eligibility concerns, and you have to go through their clearinghouse to totally separate from NIL. Are they just going to stop with everything related to FBS football and just hand it off to the CSC and say, hey, here you go, Seeley. You got it. We're done.
Totally viewed as a step toward, that breaking off, which is something that people have talked about for a long time. So I do think there's a lot of questions, and we got to take it through a go around here to see how it's going to work. And then people will adjust. But I always say this, Mitch, like college football just historically has always been about, schools, teams, coaches who are doing everything they can to find edges, and they're going to continue to find those edges. They're going to continue to find those loopholes. And there's going to be ways that the big dog continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I just don't think you could prevent that from happening. And even with a clearinghouse that is supposedly going to even out the entire sport.
Can't put the genie back in the bottle. And then finally, in the last 90 seconds of the show here, let's mention that this week, was Jordy Ball involved in this?
No, I just wanted to mention Jordy Ball because I thought it was a rule. Yeah.
It's the Jordy Ball podcast. Well, that's over. That's over.
Okay,
The season's over. All right. She could be involved in this though. This week, a group of women who compete at the collegiate level are filing an appeal against the House settlement ruling, saying it does not comply with Title IX, which it most certainly does not.
It absolutely does not. Correct. Yeah.
They're saying it's illegal because Title IX is federal law. So I'm not sure of the court path that this appeal will travel. Seems that because the House settlement was determined in federal district court, that this one could take a path to the Supreme Court, to the United States Supreme Court. Is that, I mean, do we have any like law professors out there or somebody who can chime in and say that like this thing is headed for the Supreme Court, this appeal? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. And then you just have no idea, because then it's just the 9 justices sitting there and they could say the House settlement is illegal and you cannot do any of this. So we thought it was over, and maybe it is over. It seems that it's business as usual and moving forward toward July 1st with the House settlement. But what if this appeal wins? I honestly have no idea. And I guess we can just say the story is not over. It's going to continue in the courts, not just with this appeal, but with other things, including lawsuits related to the clearinghouse.
Constantly moving. That's college athletics for the rest of time here. All right. That's it for us today. This is a good, it's a really good topic. It might not be like nitty gritty Nebraska football stuff. But man,
it all comes back to Nebraska.
It is. It's going to have a huge impact. So thanks for listening today. We'll be back again tomorrow. And if you want some portal analysis, you can check out the Portal Show with Brian Smith. You can find that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.